In this world, nothing is truly certain except death and taxes, as Benjamin Franklin famously said. But history tells us there is one more constant that never disappears: war. Because from the very first civilizations carved into stone tablets to the satellite-tracked battlefields of today, humanity has never gone more than a few decades without conflict. And as we approach the summer of 2025, marking 80 years since the end of World War II, the deadliest war in human history with an estimated 70 to 85 million lives lost, the uncomfortable truth is that peace has only ever been temporary, because even after that global catastrophe, an estimated 231 million people have died in wars and conflicts around the world, and now, with global tensions rising faster than at any time in recent memory, the world once again feels like it's standing on the edge of something far bigger than isolated regional fighting. Because in just the last 5 years alone, the number of active global conflicts has doubled, with at least 50 countries currently involved in active fighting and dozens more locked in political, military, or economic standoffs that could ignite with a single miscalculation. So today we're taking a hard, clear-eyed look at the 5 most dangerous hotspots on Earth right now. The places where a single spark could spiral into a war that drags the entire world with it. And we begin with one of the most quietly dangerous rivalries of all: India versus China, a conflict that may appear calm on the surface but remains one of the most explosive geopolitical fault lines on the planet. Because these are not just two neighboring countries with a disagreement, they are nuclear-armed giants, home to more than a third of humanity, with the third and fourth most powerful militaries in the world, and any direct clash between them would almost certainly escalate far beyond a local border fight. And like so many modern conflicts, the roots of this rivalry stretch back to colonial mapmaking, when Britain drew borders with rulers and pencils rather than with the consent of the people who lived there. And in this case, the problem centers on the McMahon Line, drawn in 1914 during the Simla Convention between Britain and Tibet, a line China never accepted because it argued Tibet had no legal authority to sign the agreement. And when China annexed Tibet in 1950 and established formal relations with India, that disagreement hardened into a permanent dispute, leaving China in control of around 15,000 square miles of territory claimed by India, and India administering about 34,750 square miles Beijing considers its own. A frozen argument that exploded into full-scale war in 1962, killing thousands, followed by deadly clashes in 1967 and near misses throughout the Cold War, until the line of actual control became an uneasy but mostly stable boundary, broken only occasionally, most notably in 2020, when hand-to-hand fighting in the Galwan Valley killed 20 Indian soldiers and an estimated 4 to more than 40 Chinese troops. A shocking reminder that even in the nuclear age, soldiers were still dying with rocks and clubs in the mountains. Yet since then, relations have cautiously thawed, with agreements in 2024 easing tensions in Ladakh, restoring flights, reopening pilgrimage routes, and even a 2025 pledge by Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi to resolve border differences. But despite these positive signals, the region remains dangerously unstable, because neighboring countries like Nepal and Bangladesh have seen governments overthrown by populist uprisings. Myanmar remains locked in civil war, and when instability spreads across borders, even calm rivals can be pulled back toward confrontation, especially when China is simultaneously involved in an even more dangerous rivalry: India versus Pakistan, a conflict fueled not just by territory, but by history, identity, religion, and raw emotion. Because when Britain partitioned the subcontinent in 1947, it created two nations overnight, triggering one of the largest and bloodiest migrations in history, and leaving behind unresolved disputes, most importantly over Kashmir, which has been fought over repeatedly in wars in 1965, 1971, and 1999, and while a fragile ceasefire has mostly held since 2003, the hatred between the two sides never truly faded, with India accusing Pakistan of supporting militant groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba, and Pakistan denying the allegations, a cycle that erupted again in April 2025 after a brutal terrorist attack in the Bizaran Valley near Pahalgam killed 26 civilians, triggering missile strikes, drone attacks, and aerial encounters that brought the two nuclear-armed neighbors terrifyingly close to full-scale war before a ceasefire finally stopped the fighting after 4 days, leaving dozens dead and billions in damage. But the real danger here lies in the imbalance of power, because while India has a far larger military, greater resources, and overwhelming conventional superiority, Pakistan's strategy has always relied on its nuclear arsenal to prevent defeat, meaning any major conventional war could quickly escalate into a nuclear exchange, a nightmare scenario that scientists warn could cause regional famine affecting millions or even billions of people. And the risk doesn't stop there, because both countries are tied into a web of global alliances. Pakistan closely linked to China and Russia. India partnered with Russia, the US, and Europe, meaning a regional war could rapidly widen into something far worse. And that brings us to perhaps the most globally significant flashpoint of all: China versus Taiwan, a dispute that sits at the crossroads of history, law, military power, and great power rivalry, because China views Taiwan as an inseparable part of its territory under post-World War II agreements and UN resolutions. While Taiwan has functioned as a self-governing democracy for more than 70 years, with its own military, economy, and identity, and although only a small minority of Taiwanese favor reunification with China, Beijing has never abandoned its claim and has repeatedly stated it will take the island by force if necessary, especially as Taiwan's ties with the United States deepen, because since 1949, the U.S. has played a central role in Taiwan's defense, selling more than $75 billion in advanced weapons, maintaining deep military cooperation, and committing under the Taiwan Relations Act to help the island defend itself, which, from China's perspective, looks like a hostile foreign power maintaining a forward base just 81 miles from its coast, a situation Washington itself would never tolerate near its own borders. And militarily, while Taiwan is well armed, China holds overwhelming numerical superiority, with far more troops, aircraft, ships, missiles, submarines, and nuclear weapons, giving it the theoretical ability to blockade, bombard, and eventually invade the island. But the real wild card is U.S. intervention. Because while the threat of American involvement may deter China from acting, if Beijing ever does move, U.S. involvement would almost certainly turn a regional war into a global one, potentially drawing in allies across Asia and beyond. And eerily similar dynamics play out just north of Taiwan on the Korean peninsula, where North and South Korea remained technically at war more than 70 years after the armistice that froze the conflict, separated by a heavily fortified DMZ where millions of artillery shells, landmines, and missiles stand ready within range of Seoul, a city of 9 million people. And while South Korea fields one of the most advanced militaries on Earth, with cutting-edge tanks, aircraft, warships, and a massive reserve force, it faces a North Korean regime whose true capabilities remain partly hidden but deeply alarming. With over 1 million active troops, vast artillery deployments near the border, and a rapidly expanding missile and nuclear program that may already include up to 60 nuclear warheads and could reach 200 within a few years, alongside chemical and biological weapons. And what makes this standoff uniquely dangerous is the involvement of other nuclear powers, because North Korea has defense pacts with China and Russia, while South Korea is protected by the United States under a mutual defense treaty and extended nuclear deterrence, meaning any serious clash on the peninsula could rapidly escalate into a multi-power confrontation. Yet, for now, economic realities and political calculations appear to be restraining both sides, as South Korea has everything to lose from war, and North Korea's leadership may prefer stability as long as trade and support from Russia and China ease domestic pressures. And finally, we briefly touch on one more potential flashpoint that often makes headlines: Russia and the Baltic states. Because while an attack on Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania would trigger NATO's Article 5 and potentially plunge Europe into war, the reality is that Russia remains deeply tied down in Ukraine, with limited capacity to open another front unless severely provoked, especially in places like Kaliningrad. So while the risk exists, it appears lower than the others for now. And when you step back and look at all 5 hotspots together, the truly terrifying reality becomes clear. The world is not divided into isolated conflicts, but into an interconnected web of rivalries, alliances, and unresolved grievances, where a single spark in one region could ignite fires across the globe. And while cooler heads may yet prevail, history reminds us that wars rarely begin because everyone wants them. They begin because leaders miscalculate, crises spiral, and options disappear faster than anyone expects. So the question isn't whether the world is dangerous, but whether humanity can break its oldest pattern before it's too late. And as always, we'll continue tracking these conflicts closely here. So if you want to stay informed before today's tensions become tomorrow's headlines, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below, because understanding what's happening now may be the most important thing we can do to prevent what comes next.